You know, I've always been interested in these issues even as a youth, and when I went to college, I studied in sociology. Actually, it was an interdisciplinary program, but it was essentially sociology. But interestingly enough, after that, it was a long time before I decided to go to graduate school. I was in the Army for 2 years. I worked at a variety of jobs. I was I was a neighborhood employment counselor in Boston, in an inner city section of Boston. I worked in a program that helped kids coming out of drug treatment find jobs. So I was doing kind of human service things, and I got involved in a teacher training program. I actually got a teacher training degree, and I did student teaching at South Boston High School, which was a very, really an amazing experience, challenging and difficult. And I was at MIT, and we were running this teacher training program, and I was co-teaching seminars on schooling and society, and it occurred to me that I have to get a more advanced degree, and I was 34 years old, and I decided to go to graduate school. And you know, I always wondered, well, how am I going to really make a living and have a trade that's going to be stable? And I discovered I love statistics. And you know, I always knew I loved math, and I could use my technical interest to study social problems and inequality, which I was so fascinated about. So that was it. As soon as I could put those two together, having tools and ways of skills that I could productively bring to bear on these interesting questions, then my identity as a student and then as a researcher immediately came from that. So I went off to, I got a degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, actually, in policy analysis and evaluation. I went off to Michigan State University and worked there for 15 years, and then I came to Michigan for 8 years, and then to the University of Chicago. I've been here 8 years. So, so it was a very roundabout path. It was not the traditional, you know, you get out of college and then you go to graduate school. When I think of a research project, there are always two questions. If you have a research question, if you have the answer to this question, how exciting would it be to know the answer to this question? So it's picking a good question. And so question finding, identifying areas to be engaged in that are productive, that are exciting and interesting, is the first thing, and being able to make the case that the answer to this question would be really interesting, useful, whatever. And then the second question is, will we believe the answer? If we now use this study, will we actually get an answer to this question that we can believe? And that's the methodological side. That's where you really have to ask yourself, you know, I might assert that that this new intervention has a great effect on kids, or that this way of organizing schools, I'm particularly interested in education, this way of organizing schools or instruction is especially effective for these kinds of kids. And I say my evidence shows that, but you know, how much confidence can we put in that statement? Are there other alternative explanations? You know, maybe the program really wasn't effective. It was just that, you know, the kids who were in that program were highly motivated or skilled. So the methodological side comes into play in whether you can design a study to give you a really definitive answer, or if not definitive, at least a very good answer to this question. So, knowing enough about the literature and knowing what we already know, and then figuring out what would be exciting to know next. That's the question finding part. And then the methodological training is the other part. So you have to be good at those two things. And I think that a lot of people in the social sciences don't spend enough time getting really, really good at methodology. It really sharpens up your intellectual judgment to be very sharp methodologically. So putting effort into learning about research design and statistics and measurement and modeling is undervalued and very, very important. I mean, there are people who don't do that, who do sort of close observation in local settings and who are great interviewers and who do sort of more qualitative ethnographic research, and that's really great too. But even those people need methodological training because they need to be able to critically evaluate the literature. Otherwise, you don't know what we already know, and if you don't know what we already know, you won't be able to find the question, what do we need to know? One really good training for this is being in an intellectual environment where you're constantly critically evaluating new findings that people are presenting. So we have a workshop that meets every single Monday, and we have people from inside and outside the university presenting their latest work. And our job is to ask those two questions. Is it a significant question? Can we believe the answer? And we spend an hour and a half really going over people's claims for the evidence for the claims they make, and you know, it's a little exhausting for the presenters, but it's exhilarating because it's you know, we really try to get to the bottom of things. And I think if students do that, have opportunities to do that early in their careers when they first start in school, and at least in their graduate, hopefully even in their undergraduate work, and then continue to do this. The logic of research you become very, very good at that by having that kind of skill. I mean, in some sense, you become a good critic of research before you become a good researcher. Because then you can critically evaluate your own research, and that's really important. Absolutely. I mean, I can answer that question a little better with respect to my own interests. And so this is an example, because there's so many other areas. But so I'm really interested in inequality. We think that it starts very young in the home environment because parents vary enormously in their education and their own if you're interested in educational academic learning, in their own mathematical and analytical and reading skills and their ability to transmit it to their children. So there's just huge variation. And there are lots of kids in society whose parents don't have a lot of education and who don't see themselves as teaching academic skills. They love their children and they do a wonderful job, and that's very important, but they don't teach the academics. And then there's a few people, you know, some number of people who, for whatever reason, because of problems they have, are not able to emotionally support their children either, and that's another problem. So anyway, so we have a lot of inequality coming from inequality in homes, and we now have more and more kids in childcare settings, and so we have an opportunity to reach out through those institutional settings in order to do a lot better with kids. And how we do that and how we prepare them when they're 3 and 4 years old is going to have a big effect on what kind of trajectories there are when they're in elementary school, and then when they get into high school, the inequalities that we see developing become kind of institutionalized because they go on a college track or you know, they go on a non-college track, and they're being prepared for college. And in our modern labor market, there's a premium on skills, on cognitive skills, and also skills in other kinds of skills. But so at each stage, when you critically evaluate what we're doing, you find opportunities to make things much better. I think I'm convinced that school, starting with early childcare, but going on into elementary and secondary, can be much more effective than they are. And we have some evidence now of schools that are producing incredible outcomes for some of the most disadvantaged kids in our society. And to me, that's the most exciting thing. How do you then, once you see that, you say, how can we tolerate anything but giving these kids good education? It's not a hopeless, you know, it's not like inequality is inevitable. The amount of skill inequality that we have, we can, you know, kids can do great things. It's up to us to create those opportunities. And you see it happening, you say we can't tolerate bad practice in schools. But how do you then generalize it to a broad range of schools? That's a huge problem, because we're not doing it in general. In many of our large cities, as many as half the kids by age 16, 17, 18 have very few skills that will pay off in the labor market. It's a tragedy, and it's unacceptable. One thing that I think is undervalued, and maybe this is self-serving for me to say this, is the role of knowledge in helping us do better. It's not just that we need to have the will. We do need the will, and we do need the resources. That's very important, but they're not sufficient. We need to understand how you put the educational experiences together, again, over the life course of the child, and how you coordinate those. And that's what we're learning from the best research, that it's not just, in my view, having a bunch of great teachers. Their work has to be coordinated in a very self-conscious way to keep kids on track, to get kids on track, and to keep them on track to be able to do ambitious intellectual work in the poorest, most segregated schools in our society. This can happen, but it takes this coordination and relentless effort on the part of the educators. Well, you have to have a passion for this work. And the reason I say that is because it's hard work, but it's a joy if it's what you have a passion for. So you want to go into, whatever you go into, if you're going to go into academia or advanced work, graduate school, whatever, it's very important to choose something that you find fascinating, because you will be excited and you'll try to get to the bottom of things, and you'll spend the time and the effort that you need, and you'll be so happy with your work life. It'll be a hard work, it'll be an intense work life, but you're doing it because of your passion. It's intrinsically rewarding. So that's one thing. So pick something that you're really passionate about. And the other one is make sure to get very strong methodological skills, because they're in short supply, and having those skills is tremendously helpful in being successful in this business.